Title of the message today is Serving God Despite Our Flaws and Failures, and this is going to be from Psalm 90. It reminds me of a message that Wendell gave several years ago, and I love the title of it. It was, My Failure Isn't Final. My Failure Isn't Final. And that's very encouraging in so many ways when you think about it, because we put so much stock in our successes in life and stuff like that, and we've got our focus completely out of focus. Our focus should be on the Lord and all the other things ancillary. Yes, we want to have a good job. We want to be successful in what we do. But the problem is that we get things backwards. We put those temporal, worldly endeavors ahead of God instead of putting God first. Those other things will fall into place. But see, here's the deal. When we fail, if it's on a sinful level, don't misunderstand, sin can have ramifications. It can have a ripple effect. Not only affects us, but other people too. So we can't just look at sin and say, well, God's going to forgive me. Everything's going to be okay. My failure's not final because God forgives me and has that grace. That's true. That is true. However, we shouldn't go into it with that attitude, because sin can have a ripple effect. So we have to respect its power and its possible destruction. On the other hand, we have to always go back to the fact that God does forgive. He is faithful and just and willing to forgive us of all of our sins, cleanse us from all unrighteousness. We just need to go to Him. So we always have that too. So our failure is not final when it comes to sin because of the grace and forgiveness of the Lord. And if we weigh things properly in life, the failures that we have in the world aren't final if we have the proper perspective. And, folks, I'm not saying that we don't go out and try hard, that we don't go out and say, hey, this is something I want to do. We should try to do it. I mean, it's obviously within reason, but at the same time, we also have to take a step back and realize, if this doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. Because I've got the best gift I could ever have. I've got Christ. I've got heaven. I got eternal life. I want to do what's right here. I want to serve. I want to please Him. I want to help others. I want to do all that. And that's the most important thing. And if along the way, sure, you get a good job or, you're able to, improve your situation financially, there's nothing wrong with that. But once again, keep the priorities proper. Keep the order correct. Keep the level of importance correct. That way it gels much better and is a much better situation for your Christian walk. And we also have to understand the way the world defines success. By your power, your fame, your money, whatever it is. One of the terms that I really hate is when people, oh, he's a rock star. That guy's a rock star. Now they even bring it into commercials. It's so dumb. But I remember being at the barber shop one time, and yes, it's to get my beard trimmed. There was no need to look up there, but this was when Barack Obama had just started to run for office. And I'll never forget this guy. He was like, please, can I have a vomit bag? Because he kept saying to the guy, oh, it's Barack Obama. He's a rock star. He's a rock star. And I just, that kind of stuff just makes me cringe. When they say it about anybody, it doesn't matter if it was Barack Obama or Trump or anybody else, it's just the idea, that word, and people grab a hold of it and they just keep, running with it endlessly. But that's how the world defines success, okay? How does God define success? God defines success by big things and little things that we do in His service. And yeah, you have people out there in the mission field, and they are bringing the gospel of Jesus Christ to savages, to wild people. You know all those stories, and a lot of them are true. I mean, that's what happens. They go into really dangerous areas to bring the gospel, live in conditions that they don't have the comforts that we do here to bring the gospel, to encourage people. So you do have that, right? But then you have the little things too. Taking care of the kids, driving people to church, bringing the snacks, cleaning up, the sound, the music, Vince has done it, Mike and Dan. There's so many different ways that you can serve the Lord, and sometimes we get our priorities out of whack. Even with that, the Lord blesses all of it. He says everything you do is important. Everything you do is important, including showing up here. That's important too, because it's an encouragement to everybody else. When you come, you show up for church on Sunday morning, you're not just showing up for church. You are being an encouragement to the other people that are here and to the guy bringing the message. And that's not just me personally, that's just in general. So we got to get those things on the table to understand the aspect of failure, the aspect of success, how God views it, how the world views it, and how we should, as children of God, how we should observe it and deal with it, okay? Now, the next thing is regret. I've mentioned this before, but one of my favorite lines in movies comes from a movie that wouldn't be considered a classic by any means, but it was Men in Black 3. And Tommy Lee Jones is talking to Will Smith on the telephone, and Tommy Lee Jones says, "You know what the most destructive force in the world is?" And Will Smith was being a smart aleck, and he said, "Sugar?" And Tommy Lee Jones just said, "Regret. Regret." I never forgot that. I think that's very true. We can go through life with regret. It'll tear you apart. It'll chew you up. Things that you wish you had said, if I had only done this. I remember when I got fired from a job once, I spoke my piece, but for a while, I regretted not taking the high road because I really had some nasty things to say, and it would have felt good, but come on. That would have been so wrong, so inappropriate. So sometimes, you have to just, and so I look back on that and I'm thinking, man, why didn't I unload? No, there's a reason you don't, folks. And it's because of God. It's because of Him. And so regret can be a terribly destructive force. I remember working with this guy one time. This is back in the mid-'90s. And you can just tell with this guy. He was like a delivery driver for the company I work for. And this guy had pro baseball talent. He was a pitcher. And he had all the records in high school, and every team was looking at him. Every scout was looking at him. But then what happens? He hurt his shoulder. He had a shoulder injury, and he was never the same. And you could tell, even to that day, the job he was doing, the attitude he had, the regret was chewing him up. I get it, man. I get that you can be discouraged. I get that you can be disappointed. And then you can be in a funk for a while. But with Christ in your life, if you have Christ in your life, eventually you have to say, okay, enough of that now. Okay, let me get on to the business at hand, which is serving the Lord. So we don't want regret to be something that eats us alive. And even with sin, we sometimes hold on to things from a perspective of sin where God has already set us free. He's already forgiven us, and yet we hold on to it. Now, again, sin can have repercussions and create this problem. However, when you're forgiven, you're forgiven. You go to the Lord in sincerity and you ask for forgiveness, He will forgive you. And once that's done, you move on because He has. He has. And if God has, we got no business holding on to it and still churning up that regret every 5 seconds or however long it is. It's a terribly destructive thing. What's the worst thing that can happen in the world? You pursue something that's, a career or a pathway to success or something that you have a great passion about. What's the worst thing that can happen? You fail. You fail. So what? So what? You fail, but you say, you know what, Lord, thank you for at least giving me the opportunity. You have all things worked for good for those who love you. I don't know why some people had this level of success and I didn't. The thing we don't want to do is to be intimidated. I don't think we should go about going, oh, I want to do this, but I'm too afraid. I'm too afraid of rejection. I'm too afraid of failure. I'm too afraid of disappointment, so you don't put yourself out there. That's not good either. But if you do what's right, if you trust in God, and you go about your business with that, if you have temporal success, great. But if you don't, you go, oh, well, at least I wasn't afraid. At least I didn't distrust or not place my trust in my Creator, in my Savior, because of this stuff. So you go for it, whatever it may be, and if it's a win, it's a win. If it's not a win, it's still a win. You know? If you lose, you win. If you win, you win. There's no way you can lose. I stole that from Raging Bull, by the way. So anyway, we want to be blessed as we serve the Lord. What we're going to talk about today is not about salvation in Psalm 90. It presupposes salvation. What we read about in Psalm 90 presupposes salvation. This is about service. And there is joy in that service. And it gives God joy too when he sees us serving him. And sometimes people ask, well, what does God need us for? Does he need us to perform all these tasks? Well, probably not. God can do whatever he wants. He has the power to make things happen. And he doesn't say, boy, I really need these guys to do this because I can't do it. So I'm counting on you. It's not necessarily like that. But being created in the image of God with the ability to make decisions, to act on those decisions, to manage the affairs that God has given us to manage, that is important to him. Think of your own kids. You have kids, and I guess you could clean their room for them all the time. You could do their homework for them. You could still feed them. You could do all these things, but we don't do that, do we? No, we want them to grow up. We want them to understand how things work, to make good decisions, to live a life of gratitude and kindness and faith in God and all of those things. So God doesn't really need us necessarily, but he has created us to do something that gives him glory. That's what it's all about. So we need to proceed along those lines. Now, one of the things that's interesting about Psalm 90 is that you know who the author is? It is Moses. It is Moses. This is probably one of the oldest Psalms there is. And so, we think of David, we think of the sons of Korah, we think of other people who've written the Psalms, but we don't think of Moses. But Moses definitely wrote this one. And this he authored right at the time of the events of Kadesh Barnea. Does anybody know what that's all about? Here it is. When the nation of Israel, remember, they went into Egypt as a family, but they came out a nation, right? Because they went in there and Joseph was faithful. Joseph became like the prime minister of the world. Egypt was the world leader, and Joseph was the second in command. So he was like the second in command for the world. That's how much he had risen in those ranks because of his faith in God, because of what it meant for the world, the things that he did. But the new Pharaoh, he forgot about Joseph. He forgot about all those good things. He forgot about what the old Pharaoh had done. And he, of course, put the Israelites into this terrible, slave-like, persecuted, just misery that they had. And no mercy, no quarter, just worked them and worked them. They didn't care if they died or whatever. So then, the story that God is going to use Moses to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt and into the promised land. But what happens? They get out away from Egypt, and what do? They murmur. I think the word is antimonopia. Is that what it is? Where the word sounds like the actual, so they're murmuring. They're complaining and ungrateful. And they start doing idolatrous things and rebelling. And so they get on the precipice of one of the areas. And God sends in the two spies. He sends in Caleb and Joshua to spy out the land. And they come back and they say, hey, there's some giants and stuff. It looks kind of creepy, but we got it. The Lord's on our side. And what do all these other people do? No, it's too much for us. It's too much. We're not doing it. So God said right there, he said, the only people that are going to enter the promised land now are Caleb and Joseph, and anybody at the time when I say go, anybody who's 20 years old or younger. God knew their hearts. He knew the depravity of their hearts. They had seen God do miracles with the parting of the Red Sea and all these other things, and they still murmured and complained. And God said, this is your punishment. You won't enter the promised land. You know who else didn't enter the promised land? Moses. Moses didn't enter the promised land either. Why? Well, Moses was so angry at the people that what he was supposed to do as a symbolic act to the people, he was supposed to take the rock that had the living water, okay, and speak to it. And water was supposed to come out, That was the idea. But Moses was so angry that he took the staff and he struck the rock. He did it in Numbers 17 at God's command. Why? Because it's a type. We talked about types last week. What is Jesus called? He's called the rock. The rock. He is Christ the Lord. The rock. And the rock was struck and the living water came out. Sounds like the cross, right? Jesus Christ, the rock, is struck and the living water is something that we receive in salvation. But the next time, to keep that type going, the Lord wanted Moses to speak to the rock, because that would have been a great type moving forward as Jesus was crucified. Yes, he was struck, just like it said in Genesis 3:15 that he would be. And then next, it was the prayers. It was, something on the other side of the sacrifice of Jesus. But Moses didn't do that. Moses struck the rock. And then he kind of said that what we did in getting the living water to come out of the rock. So God says, look, Moses, he didn't come out and say you ruined the type, but he did, because that's what God was trying to convey. And Moses ruined it by disobeying God directly and misrepresenting what God had wanted to do for the people. And so God says, you're not going to enter the promised land. And he let him see it just before he died. He let him look out and see the promised land. But this is when Moses wrote this psalm. And what's interesting is you would think that he'd be bitter. You would think, Lord, everything I've been through, all that I've gone through, all the things that I did, all the things that you told me to do, I did, and now you're going to treat me this way and not let me go into the promised land? No. He was a servant of God, and he knew, I shouldn't have done this. I stepped too far. I went over the line, and now I can't. But this psalm, in Psalm 90, is still regaling God and talking about serving him. Okay. Even with Moses' failure, God still used him mightily. But God knew the hearts of the people, just like he knew the hearts of the Pharisees. So, let's move on to Psalm 90. It's a short psalm. This is a prayer of Moses, the man of God. Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. I love this because it shows the accessibility of God. God who has no beginning and no end. He is altogether mighty and powerful and perfect and holy. And yet we can pray to him. We have access to the throne room of God through prayers. In verse 2, before the mountains were brought forth, or you had formed the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. I love this because of the apologetic value of it. What do I mean by that? When we defend the faith and we talk about evidence for the existence of God and the truth of the Bible is so spot on logically when it comes to God's existence, because it is a logical certainty that God exists. If there was ever a time when there was nothing, what would there be now? There would be nothing. So if anything exists, God must logically exist in order to bring it all to be. There's never been a time that God has not existed. There'll never be a time where he goes out of existence. And the Bible is saying that right here, from everlasting, from eternity past to eternity future. You are God, and nothing is going to change that. And that is who we are serving. This is what Moses is basically saying. You return man to dust and say, return, O children of man. For 1,000 years in your sight are but as yesterday when it is past, or as a watch in the night. Now, once again, we've talked about this a little bit before, like in 2 Peter, where we see this verse and people say, see, the days of creation and the stuff about the millennium, it's just as symbolic as it is here. Well, or it's not literal. It's symbolic. Well, you have to make sure you understand exactly the terms and the logical underpinnings of what you're talking about, because this is talking about God himself. God is outside of time. So 1,000 years to him, it's like, 1,000 years, a billion years, what difference does it make? I don't notice that anyway, okay? And but for us, when it comes to our understanding, God gives it to us in straight numbers, in straight delivery so that we can understand. So trying to, look at this and say, well, this is literal, this is symbolic, you have to have the proper context. And a lot of people sometimes just lack that. But verse 5, you sweep them away as with a flood. They are like a dream, like grass that is renewed in the morning. In the morning it flourishes and is renewed, and in the evening it fades and withers. For we are brought to an end by your anger. By your wrath we are dismayed. You have set our iniquities before you, our secret sins, in the light of your presence. And again, what is in view here is the idea of we can harm our walk. We can harm our walk with the Lord because of the sin we get into, because of the path that we choose to take. And like I said, then we get into that vicious circle of, walking away from God, not repenting, not praying, and that creates an opportunity for us to sin more. Then we do it, the guilt sets in, we keep going, and pretty soon you are on the other side of the world from the Lord. And this is what he's talking about here. We cannot do that. Sin is the problem that messes everything up. We know this, but that God is willing to forgive and will restore us to service is part of the package as well. For our days pass away under your wrath. We bring our years to an end like a sigh. Yeah, in light of eternity, folks, our life is a blip. The years of our life are 70, or even by reason of strength, 80, yet their span is but toil and trouble. They are soon gone, and we fly away. Who considers the power of your anger and the wrath according to the fear of you? So teach us to number our days that we may get a heart of wisdom. Fruchtenbaum said this means to gain skill in living. You ever hear like, oh, I need a life coach. This is your life coach, the Bible, because doing things God's way is enhancing your ability to live. It increases your skill in living. But just because you're old doesn't mean it's over in terms of service. If you're very young, it doesn't mean that you can't serve. This is a general principle that God is laying forth here, saying that we've got a certain amount of formative years, okay? Make the most of it by serving the Lord. That's what we're being told here. It's like, you get too old, you might not be able to do it. If you're too young, you might not be able to do it. There's a certain time, generally speaking, that we can make the most of our walk with Christ and serve the living God. That's what we're being told here. Verse 15, make us glad for as many days as you have afflicted us, for as many years as we have seen evil. Now remember, we can take this and use this now, but remember the perspective from which Moses is writing. He's looking at the children of Israel and all the sin and the rebellion and idolatry and the ungratefulness. And Moses has to look at himself too and realize, all the things I saw God did. Where did that pride come from? Where did that decision come from in me? How did I let my anger override just following what God said, that I misrepresented him to the people? But it's not hard to have happen. I've done it before. I've done it where I've had to go back and, like on Facebook or something, when somebody will say really something dumb, really monumentally stupid about faith or about the Bible. And, thankfully it hasn't happened often. And when it has happened, I've gone to the person and said, hey, I flew off the handle. I'm sorry. No problem. So everything worked out all right, but still, I got so mad at their stupidity, at their ignorance, all the while trying to sound smart, all the while trying to sound informed and logical, and they were totally out of the ballpark. And so I reacted just like that, just like Moses did in this case. You can't do that. That is not the way to handle things. And so we have to keep all of that in perspective as we go along serving the Lord. Let your work be shown to your servants and your glorious power to their children. Let the favor of the Lord our God be upon us and establish the work of our hands upon us. Yes, establish the work of our hands. So, very simply, Lord, we're doing this service for you. Whatever it is, if it's a big thing, it's a little thing, however you are serving the Lord, give him the glory. Take it for what it is and say, I know that some people would, only look at big things going on in a church. You got 10,000 people. You got 5 campuses, or whatever it is. Boy, they're really doing great stuff for the Lord. And they may well be. I'm not necessarily, discounting that. But we need to understand that whether the church is as small as ours or as big as Joel Osteen's church, every little thing helps. This is our little corner of the world. This is our little local headquarters that God has given us to manage. And we want to do it to the best of our ability. I think sometimes we do. I think sometimes we don't. That's just life. That's just the way it goes. But whatever we do, we give him glory. Whatever happens that strengthens us, that strengthens each other, that has that iron sharpening iron, where we're there to pray for each other, comfort each other, laugh together, all of those things, it's all important. Yeah, it's just in our little deal right here, our little small church. However, in God's economy, he looks down on this with favor. He looks down on this with love and joy in his heart. So again, keep it in perspective. It is the best way to go. It's the best way to not get discouraged and not have regret and not go through all these things where you think, what difference does it make? What's the use? What am I really doing for God? I think it's fair at a certain point to say, Lord, can my heart hold more? Is there something you have that I can do that you can lead me to? Please, Lord, let me understand that. That's all well and good. But you also have to look at this. Remember we talked about moms a couple weeks ago? You think you're not doing the Lord's work by being a mom? Or being an aunt or a grandmother or something where you have some sort of influence over children in a good way? You think that that's not something monumentally important? It's a little thing. The world doesn't look at it as much. But who cares what the world thinks when the creator of the world says, no, it is important. That's what we have to look at.